Thank you so much for coming. Today we are going to talk about a concept that is very near and dear to my heart, tarot. So I'm very excited to be here and to share a little bit of the history. Often when people talk about tarot, it's the fundamentals of how to do it. And sometimes we want to talk about what it is. The history, the influence of it. It's a fascinating subject, so I thank you for being here with me today. So, today, we are going to go over a few different things. What is tarot? Why would we use it? Why have people used it in history? Kind of a how-to guide. And a few tips and tricks if you want to bring this into your life in a positive, holistic kind of way. But first things first, we can't talk about how to use tarot without understanding what tarot is. So here we have tarot, a history. Since ancient times, people have sought out advice from oracles. One of the most famous oracles of the ancient world was the oracle at Delphi. Ancient Greeks would travel all the way up Mount Parnassus to petition her, seeking answers for their questions, which she would answer while in a trance, a higher power speaking through her. In China, meanwhile, court astrologers of the Zhou dynasty interpreted upcoming events from the stars, the clouds, the rain. The rulers of ancient Sumeria and Babylonia looked to priests to reveal the future. And the famous seer Nostradamus gazed into bowls of water for hours to watch events unfold. Each of these very different examples of culture and history are connected by one thing, a seeking of wisdom, a utilization of what we believed to be powerful practices in exchange for important information. And somewhere in the history of all these different oracles emerged a system known as tarot. Now, oracle, as fantastical as it sounds and is, should not be a scary word. We use oracles in our everyday lives, even if we don't realize it. Every time you flip a coin, tossing heads or tails, you're consulting an oracle. When we watch the groundhog come out of its hole and decide if spring's coming soon, we're consulting an oracle. Meteorologists are simply weather diviners, seeking a specific form of the future. I open with this point to remind us today that we're examining an ancient process that has in many ways shifted to meet our modernized lives, but still holds the value and superstition of its roots. Oracles, vaguely, and tarot, specifically, are both fantastical and easily accessible measure of advice that has adapted and flowed throughout history, shaped only by the human mind's social assumptions. So, tarot, or divination cards as we know them, have been used to tell the future and seek guidance since their creation in the 1430s in northern Italy. But really, that is just the most popular story. There are so many different theories and claims as to where tarot came from. Some say it dates back over 2,000 years to ancient Egyptians in the Library of Alexandria. Others say the Crusaders brought it out of the Middle Ages. Yet another story credits the Romani people with introducing the cards. Or history stretches back even further to the 9th century China, where it started out as a card game. In summary, tarot is super old, and it has been used really throughout a multitude of cultures. It is as prevalent in history as we are in some ways. It is most likely, though, that tarot has its origins in storytelling traditions, with its individual meanings of the cards and important imagery passed and preserved by travelers. It's notable that there are distinct similarities between tarot and many storytelling practices that we still hold today. But really, after all that and all those examples, it does not matter what culture it truly extends from. There has been no limit to its historical use throughout places and times. It has held a wealth of symbolism throughout its history, from classical Greek philosophers to mystics of the Middle Ages to the esoterics of the 18th century here, all of whom and more wondered whether there was more to life than what the eye could possibly behold. So I bring you to this definition now, divination, which is the process of finding the hidden meaning or origin of events and occasionally foretelling the future. You would find this definition in almost all official dictionaries. But let's take a moment and unpack it a little bit. Generally, when we look at this definition, it's that last part that catches our eye, right? Foretelling the future. Just a little bit ominous. That's our social interpretations at play. So let's talk about these stereotypes and this fearsome reputation that we often associate with tarot. The evolution of tarot, again from its origins as a game to the Roman Empire, to that esoteric enlightenment of the 18th century and beyond, has been controlled and influenced most largely by society and by religion too. So take a moment and consider these questions. What do you think of when you hear tarot? How does it make you feel? And where do these connotations that you're feeling come from? If unease or fear was one of your feelings, you are not alone. Fear is a very common association with tarot. It's passed down through generations of changing religion, urban legends, and our very obvious fear of the unknown. That one's pretty, I think we're all scared of that. But throughout history, our proximity to tarot has changed, shifting from a special but ordinary circumstance to a ritual that often seems far away, unattainable, something that is inherently not allowed. So I want to address some inaccurate but very common fears about tarot, which is an association with dangerous magic, magic in general, and the possibility of pulling a scary card. A lot of people hear the word magic, and a very specific stereotype comes to mind. One that's kind of dark, full of scary rituals and malevolent women. You might have watched a movie or two that shows a character getting their cards read by a woman dressed in robes and beads and all that awesome 60s style makeup. The character sits down. The stakes are high, the music ominous, and the woman pulls a card from the deck, laying it face down to reveal what we all fear the most. The death card. Cue the gasps, the dramatic music, and the question, who's going to die? I bet you were watching a horror movie, right? The good news is that this is all completely bogus. Tarot is not magic. It is not spellcraft. It has absolutely nothing to do with dark entities or anything like that at all. In fact, one of my favorite interesting facts about tarot is that it was actually used in the Middle Ages by the church in order to communicate with God. So, interesting, right? I mean, for something that we view culturally as a very negative thing throughout history, it's really interesting to find that it was used in a very powerfully positive way in a lot of different cultures. So, going forward, I want to assure each and every person here that tarot is not a gateway to anything. It's nothing terrifying or dangerous. Pulling the death card does not mean you're going to die. And we will dive into that a little bit more. But first, what is tarot actually? Let's take a moment to remember that everything in life is in balance. Modern tarot is a representation of our real world. It is a tool to help us understand our place in the everyday. Again, remember, every aspect of life is held in this balance of positive and negative, light and dark. It's in silver linings and blessings in disguise. That means that negatives always have a positive side, and vice versa. And I would argue that this is the first key concept to really understanding and being able to read tarot. So let's reconsider that definition of divination for a moment. It's actually the first part that is really the most important, the part that our fear makes us naturally skip over, straight into the foretelling the future. But what really I want to address is the process of finding the hidden meaning. So I want to throw another concept at you here called predictive signs. They exist all around us, all the time, everywhere, if we choose to see them. They could be likened to concepts like superstitions, lucky signs, bad omens, dream interpretation. It's that calming feeling one might get when their favorite song comes on in the car first thing in the morning. It's the action of knocking on wood thrice so as not to jinx something important. It's asking the question, what could that mean, after you describe that really weird dream you had last night. It's the appearance of certain animals or birds that you connect with in one way or another. All of these are examples of predictive signs because they are situations or objects that give us some kind of personal prediction that is often very specific to us. And this is an important element of divination because it shows that we all personally connect with this concept in a human way, even if that way is unconscious for a lot of us. So the process of finding the hidden meaning, and thus divination itself, is the same as the natural connections our brain makes when we see these predictive signs. That calming feeling, the memory attached to a certain bird, and the following knowledge that comes with it. It is those pathways of recognition, from the signs to the understanding. That is what divination is, far more so than any concept of magic. Divination is simply us allowing ourselves to foresee what we already know, but have not pieced together for one reason or another. So, tarot is guidance. Tarot is just your self-conscious speaking to you. I like to often liken it to a conversation with a friend or a story that gives you a better perspective. Tarot is a divination tool because it allows us to delve into that process of finding the hidden meaning in a situation. It allows us to ask a question and think through it clearly. It is a device that serves as communication, whether that be with your inner self, your logical side, for example. It speaks to the future only in the way that we ourselves can project our ideas into the future, and by unearthing concepts that, again, our brain just doesn't choose to see for one reason or another. So, my favorite way to view tarot. Tarot is like therapy. Really, tarot is guidance. I cannot stress that enough. It is absolutely just like having a conversation with an unbiased party, a friend. You can ask the cards pretty much anything. They're super happy to help. Or really, let's remember our self-consciences. So, with that better understanding of what tarot is, let's talk about what is a tarot reading. How do we do that, and why would we do that? So a reading consists of laying cards out in an organized way and finding guidance within those cards. I'm pretty sure we all appreciate books in here. Raise your hand if you like to read. Yep, I figured. So think of reading a picture book to a child. Even without words, the story would be completely clear. You'd be able to tell the child you're reading to what's happening in the book. Why can we do that? I mean, think about it. It's because we have associations with the images, with the colors in the pictures, the weather in the background, the way the figures are interacting with one another, and the way they interact with their surroundings. It is understanding these associations that allows us to read cards, very similar to the divining of predictive signs, as we discussed just a moment ago. So how does this work? How do we do that? I've compiled a little list of things to look for and interpret, the first being the general meaning of the card. Each card is kind of like its own little book. It's going to have its own set of meanings, its own set of iconography and imagery. And any deck that you get a hold of or that you see would have probably a little book that comes with it explaining what these cards mean. And these are the same meanings that they used hundreds of years ago that have been passed down through those storytelling practices. So the next thing to consider would be your question. What are you seeking guidance on? How have you framed your words? How are you trying to express and bring back information to yourself? Additionally, your current circumstances. Context is very much key when you're doing a reading. And lastly, patterns. Colors, numbers, different things that keep popping up that you see. Do people point one way or another? things like that.
So one of my favorite examples of interpretation is the Renaissance games of Italy's tarocchi. Back in the 1400s, rich, I'm going to specify that, rich Italians used cards called trionfi, which means triumphs, to play a game known as il triunfos. Wealthy people commissioned beautiful card decks, which were either hand-painted or printed with cardboard wood blocks. But this was no game of gambling. It was a game of creativity. Players used the theme of the cards to compose poems about each other.
And this is a great example about how the illustrations and the context of the cards are read. Players would literally look at the images and their overall meaning to construct a story, much like a prompt and a puzzle combined. So anybody today who takes the time to read cards for themselves or others would see that divining from them is basically the same process. Of course, it's different and that you're not a player, but you're seeking wisdom. But this creates a different approach to the cards, one that hinges on reflection and examination. That's where that therapy concept comes in. It's also a difference between ancient and modern tarot that I would really like to highlight. While ancient tarot tends to swing in the direction of a silly game up to a grand prophecy, we tend to focus on more streamlined tarot. It's a little bit more concise and focused. It's become much more of a process for exploration over said grand knowledge because humanity has advanced enough to understand that magic as the ancients saw it doesn't make sense in our normal lives. The ancient gods that they believed they were receiving wisdom from are not the same ideas that we believe we receive wisdom from. Yet, the symbolic imagery has not changed, but our idea of predictive signs has. Again, no longer do they stem from these ancient gods, but from our unique and personal everyday lives.
And this has made tarot readings both more and less approachable. More so because it's personal, but less so because it's personal.
So, if one were to start doing readings consistently, they would quickly notice that no two readings are ever the same. The magic of tarot is in the way we are able to apply the cards to our own situation. I often find it really interesting that when I do readings for myself and for others, the same card will mean something completely different based on the person or the circumstances. Really, it's all about you and your situation. So you can dive in deep for a better understanding of what the cards say.
Just as we have to do some deep thinking when we really attempt to understand our own emotions. So that brings me to my next lovely definition, manifestation.
Manifestation is the creating of something through intent, thought, emotion, and action. And I wanted to bring this definition into the conversation really quickly because I think that it's a really important concept within our lives and within tarot.
Often when we use the cards, it's because we have some idea or fear that we want to push into a positive space tailored by our own desires and circumstances. When you read cards, go to therapy, even just sit down and make plans for your vacation,
you're manifesting. And we're making our life the way that we want it to be when we do that. And that's a beautiful thing. It's fascinating because it's both radically different and fundamentally the same as the ancients seeking advice themselves. But I would argue that the biggest difference over that vast stretch of time is our knowledge about our ability to manifest. Really, it's just a nice reminder that we get out what we put in. And tarot is no different. If we go looking for negatives, both in life and in the cards, we will only find and see negatives. So as we go forward, I encourage you to remember to look for the positives and to not be fearful of the negatives. Everything is in balance, so manifest those positive vibes by being positive and knowing that what we fear is just misunderstood. So moving on for that, what does tarot look like? I want to talk about the structure of tarot a little bit and dive into its history a little too. Tarot is composed of a deck of 78 cards. Each card has its own specific meaning, as we discussed, and very key symbols. It is divided into two classes, the major arcana and the minor arcana. The major arcana represents big life events and concepts. The 22 cards that make up the major arcana are generally the cards that we think of on the daily. The sun, the star, the moon, the world. Each of these represent those big emotions and big moments. And if you lay out those 22 cards in order from 0 to 22, from start to finish, they represent what is known as the fool's journey or the hero's journey, which is our continuous journey from youth to wisdom, over and over again. The minor arcana are more of the everyday situations, the people, the influences. These cards are generally less exciting than the major arcana, and they're organized in a very different way, in four suits, very similar to our modern playing cards. And that helps us understand the intricacies of our question, as each suit represents something different. Included in these are also court cards. Each suit has a page, a knight, a queen, and a king, which often are related to our inner selves or the people around us. The minor arcana are incredibly interesting to me because when we often think about tarot, we think of the major arcana and those broad concepts, but the history of the minor arcana is very rich, and we actually see that in our society more, especially through the games that we play today. The minor arcana were heavily influenced by a famous deck of cards known as the Mamluk deck, dating back to 14th, 15th century Middle East. This deck also contained four suits: swords, cups, coins, and polo sticks, which is really the only difference between ours. We have wands now. And it also had 10 numerical cards and 4 court cards each to a suit, just like we see today. These playing cards were used for gambling, but they were also clearly used as an oracle due to the rhymes written across them, which resemble a modern-day fortune cookie fortune, although much more thoughtfully poetic. So, beyond what does the deck look like, let's dive into what does the deck look like, right? People often ask me, which deck should I choose? And I always tell people that first and foremost, they should consider the art style.
And then the feeling of the deck in their hands. You should think about where it came from, what you're using it for. Most people think of the traditional Rider-Waite cards that we see most often. This would be an example of that there. These were the designs that gained popularity around 1909, when tarot really became a more common practice once again, thanks to the enlightenment of the esoterics, which are really quite interesting. All kinds of fun stuff there. But there are so many decks that have originated beyond that, each with their own unique illustrations, and inherently they all mean the same thing. If you learn to read one deck, you can read any deck. It's just about how you connect with it.
So I'm going to dive a little bit more into these different art styles and talk again about those predictive signs. Predictive signs are the things that we choose to see first and foremost subconsciously. So the Fool is the first of the major arcana. It is 0. It represents naivety, the beginning of journeys, youth. I love this card. It's usually very happy. The yellow in it is the sign of happiness. The carefree way, he just holds his arms out, a rose in his hand. He quite literally was just smelling the roses. But think about which deck suits your interest more. Which one do you connect with? Is it the inherently silly nature of the Sesame Street Fool? Mm-hmm. Is it the way the Fool in the middle over here is falling, caught only by this little helicopter patty thing? I mean, he seems to be just falling through the air much more so than any of the other fools here. And perhaps you connect to that most. Why? That there is a predictive sign. Those are the things that we connect with. So let's move. This is the star, which is another very popular card. It represents hopes and dreams. And we can see it tends to be a very bright, happy, mystical card. Lots of blues and greens and yellows and purples. But take note, there's one on the end down there that's a little bit darker with a crow skull in the middle. This is a card that I really love and I really connect to. The brightness of the white against the stark contrast of the black. It's that kind of predictive signs that calls to me. And so any card that you connect with, you will find those predictive signs in there. And that is the most important thing when choosing a deck. However, you can't get it wrong. I promise. So, what do the cards mean really? Now that we've seen what they look like and we understand where they come from, I want to dive into understanding the deeper meanings of the scary cards. So here we'll circle back to that death card that we talked about earlier. Most negative cards are inherently positive one way or another. So I've composed a little chart here talking about the superstition, the actual meaning, and the important symbols. And we're going to go over 3 cards that people typically are not very pleased about when they draw, and talk about why that's not necessarily a bad thing to draw these cards. Starting with strength. Strength can seem overpowering, kind of like a fight. But note that the way the woman is gently subduing the lion. It's a symbol of controlling our own emotions, specifically our tempers. Are you the woman? Are you the lion? Either way, this is a very calm reminder that you are in control and that you do not have to snap at something. And then there's the death card. Guess what? It means rebirth, new beginnings, a fresh start. Notice the light sky in the background, the rose on the flag. Death is smiling in this image. I actually love pulling this card because it promises a new opportunity that I'm generally really excited about. And last but not least, we have the 9 of Swords, which seems pretty ominous, right? This is one of the darkest cards in the tarot deck, and I mean that by the color. It has a black background, and the man is crying, swords hung up on the wall. And this card does generally represent anxiety, depression, insomnia.
But I actually pulled this card the other day. And like everybody, I did that little gasp, that oh no. But funny enough, I had literally just had a panic attack. My anxiety was getting worse and worse. So I thought about it, holding the card in my hand, and realized that I was the one who was making it worse, who was projecting it. Notice that the swords are hanging on the wall. They are literally valuing their anxiety so much that they framed it up next to their bed. The card was a reminder to me to stop treating my anxiety as an installation within my life. I needed to take it down, uncover my eyes, and remember that my anxiety always gets worse when I focus on it.
Of course, I could have found that advice in any singular card I pulled. Again, it's about the impressions we get from the card, not necessarily the card itself. So, we've dived into this just a little bit, but now that we're kind of getting to the end here, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how to read the cards, how one might do that. Really, it's pretty easy. Here's my 5-step simple plan. You're going to pick your question. What do you need guidance on? You're going to pick a deck. Which one felt right to you? Do you want the bright colors, something a little darker and moodier to fit your vibe and your feelings in the moment?
You're going to pick your spread, which is the organized way you're going to receive your information. Shuffle, pull, put out your cards, and go ahead and read. Pretty simple, right? Kind of.
I always get asked about the individual steps, so I'm just going to go over them really quick. And I want to remind you again that tarot is therapy. So think about what kind of therapeutic question you might ask. I've composed a couple of examples here, like, what do I need to bring into my space? How can I promote positivity within my life? How can I approach insert any situation here?
Is this business venture, relationship, action a good idea? How will it affect me? Broad, open-ended questions are always best for tarot because we're not looking for a yes or no. It's not a confirmation. It's not going to your mom and saying, hey, is this a good idea? You are looking within yourself and using those predictive signs to divine what you already know internally but have yet to accept.
Tarot spreads are also another way to kind of get involved with this. I always recommend for beginners just a 1-card draw. Ask your question, what should I bring into my life after your morning tea? Pull it and reflect. And it's a good way to get in touch with your emotions throughout the rest of the day. You could delve into a 3-card spread, which is a really easy way to format questions. You could try past, present, future, situation, action needed, outcome, my desire, my reality,
suggested course of action. Or you could dive into a more complex spread. There are so many spreads for every question you could possibly imagine. If you don't know what to do, you can look it up online. There are so many books that can offer really good, concise spreads. They can range from 5 to 27 cards. I mean, as complicated as you want to make it, as much of a story as you want to dig through. It's really no different than reading a picture book versus reading an epic. And whatever you gather from that is what is important. So right before we wrap up here, I just want to point out a few ways that one could use tarot in their everyday lives. Much in the way that in history we used to consider oracles and their opinions for everyday questions.
Pulling a daily card in the morning, like I said, is a great way to get in touch with your emotions. A great way to be a little bit more thoughtful about how we proceed throughout the day. Create a tarot journal. This is much like a diary, but focuses on what tarot card we pulled. I really like looking back through mine and seeing different patterns. Periods of my life where I pulled lots of swords, showing that I was having a lot of logical situations pop up, or lots of major arcana cards, lots of cards with bright yellow backgrounds. These patterns that emerge are just as interesting to define and look through insightfully as the actual readings themselves. And last but not least is a little bit of meditation, because I think we could all use that in our life. Pick a card, could be any card, or a card that represents the specific element that we are trying to focus on. The Empress for comfort, strength for feeling imbued with our own passion and desires. Take that and reflect on it and move on with your day. And with that, I want to say thank you. I loved being here and I loved talking about what I'm passionate about. So, thank you.
How'd you get into this?
Oh,
You're so young.
I've been doing this since I was very young. Thank you. My Nana handed me a deck of tarot cards one day when I was young, and they were pretty.
Like how young?
Oh, I don't know.
Maybe 6 or 7?
Yeah. Since I can remember, I've been playing with tarot cards and looking at the imagery and dissecting the pictures. And it's always been a very therapeutic process for me. It was very helpful when I went to university and I was having a bad day. And pulling a card, no matter what card it was, usually reminded me that it was okay and that I had the ability to continue on and I was strong. So, yeah, it's been a forever thing for me.
Is she still in your life?
She is not, no.
Oh, that hurts, doesn't it?
It does.
I lost
She's
my
around.
grandma and I miss her every day.
I'm sorry.
But no, it was forever ago. I'm old.
No, you're not.
Trust me.
Don't say such a
I can
thing.
fall and break a hip at any moment.
So sad.
That's true.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Go for it.
I'm just curious about like other divination cards or oracle cards that aren't
Yes.
tarot, because there's so many decks out there now, and like I just got a new deck and I'm like cool and symbolic, but it's like, how do you feel about those, because they're not as uniform with the deck and like the number of
Yes.
cards and the significant, I sometimes wonder, like I find value in them, but it seems kind of like anyone can write a deck about anything kind of a thing.
Yes. So tarot itself is very specific.
Yeah.
Every tarot deck that you get is going to have about 78 cards. Every so often an author, an illustrator might choose to add a couple of cards, but I've never encountered a deck where any were left out. And I've never encountered a deck that was more than 80 cards. You learn to read one tarot deck, you can read all of them pretty inherently. Oracle, however, is like tarot's little sister. Oracle's a little bit more free-spirited. Every deck is completely unique. And I would say those are more like prompt cards. They answer questions in a very lyrical kind of manner. And you really have to sit down with each Oracle deck and get to know it individually, because they're really a reflection of the author and the illustrator themselves. So while tarot, I would say, is a very ancient practice, Oracle itself is derived inherently from the term oracle and is a much more modernized version of it. I love Oracle cards. I use them just as much as I use tarot, but where I usually consult tarot for a more specific question, I might add an Oracle card into it. One of my favorite Oracle decks just has emotions on it. So sometimes it's unclear to me what emotion I'm really wrestling with within a spread, and I'll pull my Oracle card and it will tell me kind of where I'm leaning. And I find it's always really interesting. It's very accurate in my experience, and that might just be because it's highlighting something that I was unaware of. But yes, Oracle is inherently different, but I would say it's a little more user-friendly. You can easily learn how to use an Oracle deck, whereas tarot usually takes a little bit of study. It doesn't have to. Like I said, you can just read through tarot with your predictive signs, and that is totally okay and completely accurate. Oracle is just all about predictive signs. There's no rhyme or reason to it unless if there's a guidebook. Yes.
Is it, I was told that you shouldn't buy cards for yourself, and is that true?
I completely would disagree with that. I have a lot of people ask me about that. That's actually a daily question I get at the shop. A lot of the cards that I connect with the most strongly are decks that I have bought myself.
And also, if you get a deck from somebody, if you don't know the history of the deck, is that a situation?
It's neither negative or positive. I usually like to cleanse my decks, and you can do that in any way that makes you comfortable. I like to wrap mine in like a scarf, or like put it with like a rock that makes me just that I like.
Yeah.
And it makes it feel cleaner to me. Sometimes decks, when they're touched by other people's emotions, tend to feel a little heavy. Yeah. And it's kind of like they can get confused by your own emotions, even though that's just our innate sensing that somebody else has used it, and so we're confusing those emotions.
So that's the question you answered it.
Beautiful. Do you have any more questions?
Where do you get a deck of cards like this?
We sell lots of decks of cards at our shop, Blackbird Tea and Tails downtown. I'm sure there's some...
Here in Mattress?
Yes, where the old State Farm is, right downtown, across the street from the pawn shop. I'm sure there are decks here at the library too that can be borrowed, or at least books on them. Books. Okay. You can always come to our shop and I'm happy to help you pick out a deck that you would like.
And if you know nothing about this, wouldn't it be better to come to a person like you?
You can absolutely do that.
To help out? Because like, if you have no idea what you're doing.
You know, I would both say yes and no. If it's something that you are uncomfortable with, I'm always here as a resource, and there are always others that will serve as resources to help you find the best possible course of action for you. And that could be me doing a reading for you, or me helping you pick out a deck. But you cannot do it incorrectly. Like, you can't. I tell people this all the time. Whenever you have a question, it's okay. There's no pressure. If you see a deck and you think it's super pretty and you want to take it home, that is a completely valid reason to get that deck and use it.
Just because you like it?
1,000%. I mean, again, it's like going to therapy. You wouldn't go to a therapist if you didn't like them. You pick the one that you like the best and you continue to go see them. And same with friends. I like to liken my tarot decks to friends. They all look different, and so it feels to me like they have different personalities. And so sometimes when I want happy advice, I go to my happiest deck. And if a deck looks happy when I'm shopping, I might take that one home because it's pretty and it looks happy and it makes me joyful.
Sometimes you just pick one because you like the artwork.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, the artwork is key. If you like the artwork and the artwork makes you feel a certain sort of way, it's one of those predictive signs inherently. And I say go for it.
Yeah. What would you say is the major difference between an individual doing a reading for themselves or for someone else?
Unbiased third party. Those predictive signs that I was talking about they only work if you open yourself up to them. And sometimes when we go to the cards, it's because we are seeking advice on things that we don't really want to think about. Things that scare us or hurt us, or just the stakes are so high that we don't want to really think about the possible negatives. We want to draw a good card, right? So you get those predictive texts, and when you go get a reading from somebody, they read the predictive texts for you. And the better they know you, the more they'll be able to apply it to their situation. But that's actually why I like to get my cards read by somebody that I don't know. They can tell me what they see in the cards through my question, and it usually gives me a sense of clarity that I would not have come to if I had been reading the cards, because I did not want to see those predictive signs. I did not want to admit that, oh, this was a really bad idea, and this is gonna have a consequence. But if somebody else is telling you that, you then have the option of either choosing to believe or continuing to ignore those predictive signs and move on. Just like therapy. You can totally ignore your therapist. Great question. Yeah.
One more question.
Go for
If
it.
you're reading the cards for someone, should their question be spoken out loud or not?
I always ask people to speak their question out loud. I have found in my experience of doing readings for people, if they don't speak it out loud, it's usually because they're testing you in some way or another. I've definitely had people tell me, oh, that was not the question I asked, when it absolutely was, and they just did not want the reading that they got. So stating things clearly puts everybody on an equal plane of being able to communicate better. Because miscommunication is just not what we want. It's not gonna make a reading work out. So yes.
One more question. Should they shuffle the cards or do you shuffle the cards?
You can do it either way. When I do readings, I shuffle my cards 3 times and have them cut the deck.
Okay.
But when I do readings for myself, I do it completely differently. And sometimes I encounter a person and I just kind of feel like I want to do it a different way.
Yeah.
And so I just do that. There's no rhyme or reason that you have to follow. You can truly do whatever you want. I have a friend who throws her deck on the ground and shuffles them, and when one goes face up, she's like, that's the card. Yeah, you cannot do it wrong.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ew, and when they're testing you, that's insulting.
I mean,
You
people,
don't think like, oh, you're a fraud. Yeah, that's insulting.
I'm sure we
Shame
all
on them.
encounter it in our daily lives, so we'll never want
Q&As
to
are part of it,
believe in you. And when it comes to things like tarot, a lot of people are a little bit trepidatious because we have those negative social connotations to go with them. We see in movies and media, in our, satanic panic of the 80s and the 60s and all that. So there's a lot of historical background that goes into that, and I totally understand when people feel that innate need to see proof that tarot does work. It's just, it doesn't make it,
It's insulting.
it makes it a little difficult. But
Yeah, like, sorry, that's just not cool. Not cool.
Culture and society and the norms within it. And when
yes,
you're stepping outside of it, you're nervous about it. So you
exactly.
have to test it with tippy toes.
Yeah, dip your toe in.
Right?
Yeah, and so, yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah, I totally understand when people tell me that they don't want to tell me their question, and I would never push somebody to tell me something that they didn't want to say. but I'm still going to draw the cards, and I am probably going to say the exact same thing I would have said anyway. And it's up to them to decide if they want to take that and see it as truth, or if they want to say, that wasn't my question, and ignore what they were really thinking. So, yes.
I find it interesting that you're not expecting a card to give the answer, but to challenge you to come up with an answer that is meaningful.
Yes, exactly. A lot of people think of tarot and they think of magic, like I was saying. And tarot is not magic. I'm not waving a spell. I'm not receiving a yes or no answer. It is a constructive tool to allow me to come up with the answer that was already there. The answer exists. The cards are just helping me uncover it and understand it.
It's kind of like astrology. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not, but if it makes you look at something from a new perspective that you haven't thought of,
Yes,
then it's
exactly.
not a waste of time, effort, money, or talent.
I completely agree with that. Absolutely.
Make sure you grab Nova's information and check out their store. It's kind of just a place I go just to smell books for a while and tea. But
Gabby, I love you.
Yes, we've got books and tea. We're a if I can speak properly, a fantasy-based store. So we have all kinds of really fun, just magical things. It's a great time. So come say hi.